slaves of Achashverosh. We're redeemed. We're not losing our lives, and to the contrary, we were given a certain amount of prominence, but we're in Golus. We're slaves of Achashverosh. But then the Gemara says something else, right? There's a whole shaila. What do you do in a leap year when you have two others, like this year, Tafshin Pei Beis? When do you do Purim, the first other, the second other? There's an argument to do it in both. In other words, either the first or the second. And the halacha is you do it in the second other, not the first other, the second other. There's a reason why. And the reason is, as you know, you just don't realize that you know. Mismach geula legeula. That's where this expression comes from. You want to join one geula, the geula of Purim, which is called the geula she'eina shleima, not complete geula, with the geula of Pesach, which is a complete geula. Which is why the halacha is that we celebrate Purim in the second Adar, to make it Adar asamuch l'Nisan, the Adar which is closer to Nisan, to join a geula she'eina shleima with a geula shleima. So this man said that the day after Purim, you're already going to Pesach. So you're going away from a geula she'eina shleima, from an incomplete geula, to a geula shleima, to a complete geula. This is why they came to the Rebbe rather than the Rebbe go to them. Had the Rebbe had done a citizenship before Purim, before Adar, before Purim, so it would have been a geula, but not a geula shleima. So he would go into their building. That was his chiddush gefil. I thought it was worth repeating. So since it's already going towards Pesach, I already got more than one bracha for Akosha Nefeilich Pesach. We're holding in that time of year. From the Trachtenberg in Akosha Nefeilich Pesach, or Rav Sheilich in Akosha and Pesach, whatever the case is. But that was his dead head. So I'm remembering the Sikha, when the Fidik became a citizen. On the one hand, it was very public. On the other hand, it was very private. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, organized it, and there were very few chassidim there. The only chassidim who were there were Rabbi Kazanovsky, Rabbi Chadakov, the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, obviously, and that's it. That's it. Rabbi Shmuel wasn't even there. The Rashag wasn't there. Nissen Gordon was there, but Nissen Gordon was there as a reporter, not as a chassid. You understand? But on the other hand, the Rebbe invited the press. The Rebbe wanted the Frierdiker Rebbe's citizenship to be an event which was in the newspaper. In the Yiddish press, and in those days there were many Yiddish newspapers that came out daily or twice a day even, should report of the Frierdiker Rebbe's citizenship. And it's a beautiful, you've seen the film, right? The Rebbe had the film in his room. After Gimel Tammuz, they found the film in the Rebbe's room, and they produced it in color film in 1949. It was a considerable undertaking. It was a rare phenomenon of color film then. And the Rebbe made sure that this event should be done in a way that's the best that could possibly be. So the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke a short sikha, which is printed now in the Sefer HaSichas. They printed the sichas from 1949, relatively recently. So they printed the sikha that the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke when he became a citizen. And it's very interesting, I think. The Rebbe started that Avraham Avinu from Lech Lecha begins Avedis HaBirurim. I think that's how the Sikha starts. That from Avraham Avinu's journey of Lech Lecha, Hashem tells him to move. This is the beginning of the elevation of the sparks and making the world a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and so on. So the Rebbe says that the Medrash says Avraham was traveling from place to place. And he came to places where people had what they call in Spanish countries siesta, Keina Arbetzich. No one overworks. There's an afternoon nap and an evening nap and an early morning. And then he came to Salama Shal Tzeir. Salama Shal Tzeir means the strip. Sulam literally means a ladder. The strip, which is along the coast of the Mediterranean, that's Tzeir. Tzeir is called in English Tyre, Tyre, which is where now is Lebanon, directly above Eretz Yisrael. And the people who lived there were very, very resourceful. They were very industrious. They were hard workers. They were businessmen. They were seafarers. They had business dealings with Phoenicia. Phoenicia is in the north coast of Africa, and there was a colony from Phoenicians that settled in Tzoyer. And they were a very industrious society. Shlomo Melech was in business with them. They helped build the Beis Hamikdash. And Avraham Avinu came to this place and he saw people working hard. Harbit, people work. They got, when are you going to work? There's no siestas. Hat Avraham Avinu gesagt, I want to be amongst these people. And the Rebbe said, this is why I chose America to be the place from which I'm going to do my work of spreading Yiddishkeit. Now again, I didn't see the Sikha today or yesterday, but my understanding is that the Rebbe was saying that he's in favor of the fact that Americans are hard workers. And it's a good thing. And it explains why he chose this country to be the base of operations to spread Yiddishkeit to the whole world, including Eretz Yisrael, which was then already in Jewish hands. Eretz Yisrael became a state in 1948, and this is 1949. And the Rebbe chose America, because Americans are hard workers. Interesting, very, very interesting. Anyway, so we had a Shalom Aleichem, my camera is ready to roll, and the Shia is ready to start. We're learning Tanya, Kedarkenu. We do every Sunday Tanya with Hashem's help. And by the way, please tell people about the Shia. People aren't even aware that the Shia has resumed with just doing Sundays. The Maimed I still do, but the Maimed I just record at home, and it's on my website. Free and clear, no charge. And I do it, everything is on video now. All the new classes are video. If anybody wants to join, I have a group where I send all my classes that I produce each week. If you want, I'll put you on my WhatsApp group, and I'll be happy to send you the classes. So the Maimorim I'm still doing, but we have Baruch Hashem Sunday, Tanya and Yem, with Hashem's help. So please tell people, especially people who remember meeting here at the Shir. So it's Tanya, and we're starting Perek Chof, chapter 20. Today I'm going to try and give a short introduction. Okay, 2 weeks ago I gave you a very long introduction. Today I'm going to try and give you a short introduction, and you'll see how well my efforts at trying translate into action, because I'm usually not so good at this. The Tanya, remember this again. The Tanya is a Lakutei Eitzos. It's very important to understand this. You have to appreciate the Tanya as a sefer, as a book of counsel, of advice, of practical instruction to Yidden, to Hasidim, who needed help in Avodas Hashem. They needed help in Avodas Hashem. Tanya, to use the classic language, is instead of Yechidus. And Yechidus, the idea of going into the Rebbe personally, was for the sake of Avodas Hashem. In other words, if a person had a physical issue and he needed a bracha from a Rebbe or a miracle from a Rebbe, he didn't have to meet the Rebbe. He could have sent him a note. He could have gone to his secretary. He could have gone to one of his family members and asked the Rebbe to be mispalo. Yechidus was distinctly designated for Inyanim Pnimiyim. I mentioned the story to you 2 weeks ago. And now I saw it, I heard it from Rabbi Grona. I don't know if I saw it in the Sefer. I heard it from him. That the Friedrich Rebbe complained to Rabbi Simpson that people are coming into Yechidus and they're talking about Dvarim Shel Ma Bakach. They're not talking in Yoni Avodah. They're talking about Parnasa, health. And the Rebbe said, Yechidus hat me gemacht. The Friedrich Rebbe said, Yechidus was created for the purposes of Inyanim Pnimiyim. And if people are not going to do Inyanim Pnimiyim, ich tracht aufzuhören. I'm thinking to stop. So Rabbi Simpson panicked. He ran to Reb Shmuel Levitten. He was the mashpia of the Bachrim, who was also very close to the Friedrich Rebbe. So Shmuel took a group of Bachrim and he prepared them that they should go into the Friedrich Rebbe speaking in Yoni Avodah. So we had once by us in Yeshiva Fabrengen, years ago, Rabbi Groner, Olav Hashalom, Zachein al-Racha Fabrengen with the Bachrim. At the end of the Fabrengen, I told him the story and he got very excited. I remember that. I was one of those Bachrim. To go into the Rebbe speaking Yoni Pnimim. Yechidus, the personal maybe to the Chassid and the Rebbe, was designed by the Alter Rebbe for Avodah. If you had business or health, you could have written a note. Going into the Rebbe, Likonis, Ledaber iti imi b'yechidus, as the Alter Rebbe writes in the Hakdama of Tanya, was for Inyanim Pnimiyim. And the Alter Rebbe wrote the Sefer Shel Beinanim, the Sefer Lakutei Amorim, Sefer Shel Beinanim, as a continuation of Yechidus. That in the Tanya you meet the Alter Rebbe Yechidus. Of course, in the times of the Alter Rebbe, the Chassidim were not happy about it. They preferred the personal meaning to the Sefer, to the writing of a book. And the Alter Rebbe said, no, this is how it has to be. And there's a variety of different arguments, and one of those arguments, of course, is the Alter Rebbe says, I know you personally. And because I know you so well, when I wrote this Sefer, I had you specifically in mind. So I think the Rebbe even said it, but Chassidim, I heard this from my Mashpiyim, that when the Alter Rebbe wrote, I know you, and I recognize you, and I understand you, and I'm writing the Sefer for you, he meant every Yid was going to learn the Sefer Tanya Kaddish until Mashiach comes. He meant us. not just his Hasidim, who he knew begashmias, kipshutei, b'yeda, makira, kamina means anybody who learns Tanya. So accordingly, we learned the whole Tanya from cover to cover. We learn every page. But when you're learning Tanya, you have to bear in mind very significantly that it's a sefer of avodah. It's a sefer that teaches us to serve Hashem. And in as much as it's sefer of avodah, you have to be makim akoymi umadregosei. Not every word of the Tanya was written for every single person on the level of avodah. Everybody has to know their place. So the Tanya offers a variety of different avodah techniques and solutions and methodology to help us serve Hashem. And not every single word speaks to each person. One page of Tanya speaks to one person, another page of Tanya speaks to a second person, the third page of Tanya speaks to a third person, and so forth.
That would seem to imply that I don't have to learn the whole Tanya. Can't be.
Well, on a certain level, there's actually truth to that. Right? On a different level, you learn Tanya to understand, and with the help of your Asay L'Charav, with your Mashpia, what the Alter Rebbe calls in the Hagdama, Zekenim Shabe'ire, the Elter Chasidim, you have to figure out which pedic you need to know right, which is touches you on the deepest levels. So the Tanya gives different pieces of advice, and in general, it's two pieces of advice. Two methods to Beinani. And again, specifically, it's much more than two, as I mentioned to you in 2 weeks ago's class. But generally, it's two pieces of advice. This is our 4th week, right? This is our 4th week, so 3 weeks ago. Number one, Me'ach Shalt al Alev. It's an intellectual method, what we call the long, short approach. To learn, to understand, to contemplate, to think it over. To contemplate, to think it over in the kind of a way that will trigger the emotions of the heart. Because when a person's heart is triggered, his ability for self-mastery, his ability for self-control is increased. That's such moyach shalit al alev. And I mentioned this to you that it says in Chassidus Nayim Beis, and the Rebbe's meramas it in his Rishimis, that there's 2 readings of the word moyach shalit al alev. That means 2 different things. The first reading of moyach shalit al alev means the mind educates the heart, teaches the heart. And the second is moyach shalit al alev, the mind controls the heart. They're 2 very different things. Teaching the heart and controlling the heart. Teaching the heart is a sophisticated process, right? I want to learn and I want to understand so that my heart should feel based on what I understand. You're teaching the heart. There's a second process which is called Mayach Shalat al Alev, which means literally to manage, to control the heart. What is the difference between Mayach Shal, which means to teach, and Mayach Shal, which means to control? The answer is, and this is basic, that when a person is davening and learning, at the time that he's engaged in spirituality directly, especially davening, so then his Mayach Shal Alev means the mind is educating his heart. The mind understands, and the mind is teaching the heart that what the mind understands, the heart should feel. The famous Lashon that the Pesach Mal Stavka told of Zalman Zezmer, the Hazel feeling with the Kabba Greift. The heart should feel what the brain understands. But you don't daven all day long, right? You're not Rabbi Vestach Halavai Shispal Adam Kolayim Kule. You're not the Madrega of Rabbi, whose Torah was like Tefillah, right? We're not that Madrega. I think Rabbi Yechanan said it. We have to stop davening. We have other obligations, other occupation, other business, which is not directly involved in Yiddishkeit. So when we stop to daven, the idea that the mind educates the heart also stops. And you revert back into the mind controlling the heart. You draw strength from the time that you daven, that after you daven, you should control your heart, not in what's called a pnimius way, the mind inspiring the heart, but in a makif way, the mind controls the heart because of the power you drew from the davening until you daven the next time. This is an intellectual process that requires a lot of skill, a lot of technique, a lot of skill. You have to have a strong brain, good focus, you have to know how to relax, you do a lot of things which are kind of difficult to do. So the Alter Rebbe offers a second solution. And the second solution is called Ava Misoteres, to arouse the Pinta Yid, the hidden love. And this technique of Beinani is a much simpler technique. It's not the long, short way, it's the short way. You could make an argument that it's not Chabad, it's Poilin, it's more emotional, more directly emotional. And the second technique is visualization. There's a very, very big difference between trying to learn and understand something and trying to fantasize and picture something. They're very different things. Understanding is a deep intellectual process. Visualization just requires imagination. That's all it requires. You don't have to be smart. You have to just picture, imagine yourself in this condition. And the condition you have to imagine yourself in is not so pleasant. In the Lashon HaGemara, maskirin le yem hamisa, that you have to remember the end of Mesiras Nefesh. And you can use this as a technique to being a Beinani. And this is what we're currently learning. Okay, for those who are not aware, we're starting chapter 20 today. We're starting Perek Chof, which is on page 50. Daf Chof Hey on page 50 in the Tanya Kedisha. This is where we're holding. We're in the middle of this discussion. We're in the middle of this discussion about being a Beinani, not through Mayach Shalta Alev, the mind educating or controlling the heart, but being a Beinani through the technique of Ave Musteres. That means I am using my imagination to visualize my own readiness for Mesiras Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem, and by visualizing my own readiness to be Mesiras Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem, I have the strength. Tovakama Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Hara starts to bother me. So I tell myself, if I am prepared to give my life to be a Jew, I could control my Yetzer Hara. That's essentially what we're going to be learning. But it takes 8 prakim, 8 chapters to make that point. 8 prakim to make the point of using the power of imagination and visualization to imagine and visualize the inyan of Mesiras Nefesh HaKiddush Hashem, and then use that as a practical tool, as an actionable tool, whenever I want to do an Aveda. I mean, the Gemara says, in the Lashon HaGemara, the Rebbe spoke about the Gemara also, the Gemara says that when the Yetzer Hara bothers you, you got to fight with him. And there's different solutions. You take him to the Beis HaMedrash, you take him to the Beis HaKnesses, and if you try all the other solutions and nothing else, make you have to be angry at Yetzer Hara. Tanya Perek Lamed Aleph. Sometimes you got to use anger, and when all else fails, when you're trying to fight with Yetzer Hara and curtail him, curb him, shut him up, he shouldn't bother me, and you can't. So the Gemara says, you tried this, and you can't quiet the Yetzer Hara. The Gemara says, think about death. Think about Hepech HaChayim, the opposite of life, and draw strength from that to be stronger than Yetzer Hara. So Alter Rebbe doesn't use those words. He doesn't use the words Maskirin L'Yem HaMisa. Alter Rebbe uses the words, try to visualize inyan of Mesiras Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem, which we're going to get to. But we're in the middle. We're in the middle of the parasha, middle of a story. What did we learn so far? In the first 2 prakim, chapters 18 and 19, in a sentence, what we learned in the last 2 prakim was the idea of the Paltiel Yid. In these 2 chapters, 18 and 19, the Alter Rebbe introduces us to the concept of the neshama, of the Paltiel Yid. What's the Paltiel Yid? The Paltiel Yid is the idea that each one of us has inside of ourselves an inherent, an inner connection to Hashem that is so loyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that if need be, it would give its life away rather than separate itself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like the classic Lashon from the Alter Rebbe, which is quoted in the Hayem Yeh. Ayid, nicht will, nicht kann, werden abgerissen von Göttlichkeit. A Jew neither wishes to, nor is capable of being torn away from godliness. And the Alter Rebbe's whole argument is that this is not a learned behavior, it's an inherent behavior. The idea that a Jew cannot be separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not something which developed over time. It's in the nature of the neshama. The Alter Rebbe says in Maimorim, the Rebbe brings in this Maimorim, and the Rebbe talks about it. This idea that a Yid cannot be separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and if a person is put in a position where, quote, he's forced to choose separation from the Eibishter, or the opposite of life, chas v'shalom, the opposite of life, his readiness to give away his life is because he doesn't have a choice. That's Alter Rebbe's Lashon. Ki'ilu davar she'i efsher klal lichva b'deshem echad l'shum tam v'das v'tainu mayna klal. The power of Mesiras Nefesh in a Jew, argues the Alter Rebbe, is such that the Jew doesn't have an option. He doesn't have the possibility of crossing a line which will make him say to himself, I'm no longer a Jew. You understand? A Yid can't do that. The neshama of a Jew does not permit. The neshama of a Yid does not permit. The neshama of a Yid does not permit that he should do an action which says to himself that by crossing this line, I am no longer a Jew. I've told this to you many times. This is an experience that I had. I didn't read it in a book or hear the story. I witnessed it. When I was a kid, I'm talking now 15, little, very little, 16. I was learning in yeshiva in Los Angeles, at Chana Chabad. And a bacher came to yeshiva. He's my age, which means that now he's also he's still my age. We're both in our late 50s. We're marrying off children who's under 8. But he's a Chassidish. He was a very, very Chassidish bacher, and he's a very Chassidish young man. So before he came to Rabbi Yossi in LA, he learned in Eretz Yisrael. And he met some Lubavitcher radicals. I mean, really good ones, yeah. So we went on Mivtzayim on Wilshire Boulevard. I was very uncomfortable. It was all these hotels, the offices for the hotels in Las Vegas. Mir ze gewen sehr schwer. He didn't see anything. He had no problems. But he had this mishagas, and he would stop people on the street. I remember pulling people into a movie theater to put film. He didn't know like boss. He didn't, not into a church, but wherever he needed to put on film. But he would stop people on the street. And he had this shtick, and I witnessed it maybe a dozen times, on a guzma. He would stop people on Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, and he would ask them if they were Jewish, and they would say they were not. No. So he would say, you're not a Jew. And they would get so upset. It didn't happen once, it happened so many times. It was amazing to witness. Remember, I was 15, and he was 6 months older than I. We were little kids, kinder. But boy, he had a measure of chutzpah. a hefty dose. But this was his thing. I don't know who taught him this, but this was a standard thing by him. He would meet a person, are you Jewish? And they would say no. He would repeat, you're not a Jew. And if they were not a Jew, he would say, yeah, I'm not Jewish. And if they were a Jew, they would get so upset. And I don't know how many of these people actually said, okay, I'll put on film. I don't think that worked. But he certainly got to them. They would get, no, I'm Jewish and leave me alone. But this happened with such regularity. It was remarkable to think. So I'm asking you a dumb question. Here's a man or a woman who doesn't mind saying I'm Jewish, so that some solicitor, some panhandler, some nudnik should leave him alone. But when you repeat to them their own words, Toich kedei dibur. Someone tells you, I'm not Jewish, and you repeat back to them, you're not a Jew, and they get upset. What does that mean? So to use an elementary school illusion, when they said it, they crossed their fingers, They put their fingers behind their back. I'm not a Jew, yeah? But when you said it to them, you didn't cross your fingers, you meant it. And they can't live with it. It's a phenomenal thing. You're talking about, Rachmana litzlan, very secular Jews. Nishka from a mention, not talking about kids who grew up in Brooklyn, you're talking about Southern California. Then, and the neshama was not comfortable being confronted by the fact that they just said, I'm not Jewish. When they said it, somehow they forgave themselves. When someone said it back to them, they would get so visibly upset. They would get really upset. It bothered them that someone told them you're not a Jew, even though literally within 5 seconds they said it themselves. It's crazy. You can't explain it logically because it isn't logical. Pintel Yid is not logical. Alter Rebbe says we use the word teva because in this case, teva means you can't explain it. You cannot explain the power of being a Jew. You can't. It's a neshama thing. It's an atzmiyazdik thing. I've told this to you many, many times that the girls in Besrivka, I teach in Besrivka seminary, so once it was Hanukkah time, what they call the season, Vestach. And one of the girls sent me on her phone a Facebook. Today, to make an advertisement, to make an official page is nothing. So this person gave out a page which had a message. And the message was, I love the Jewish religion. It's the only religion where I'm an atheist and I'm still a Jew. And I think he actually wrote his name. So I made a whole class out of this. I said, how much religion is in this statement? I'm an atheist and I'm still a Jew. Now, if you're an atheist, why do you care to be a Jew? Why do you care? and you care enough to make an announcement and tell all your friends who are going to tell their friends, it's going to end up in a Beis Sifka seminary class, and I'm going to spend 45 minutes studying your atheism. What kind of atheist are you if you're so delighted by the fact and you want to tell the whole world that you're still Jewish? There's so much emunah in that. Yeah, but, if Jews don't make sense, or to plain English say, Jews are nuts, Shalom Aleichem, welcome to the real world. You know, you've discovered what we all already know. This is the concept of the Pintel, the Neshama. And the Alter Rebbe presented it in the last 2 chapters. Now here's the problem. The Pintel Yid sleeps. And in many of us, not only it sleeps, the Pintel Yid is exiled. Sleeping means that it could wake up if it chooses to. Exiled means that it can't even wake up because it's in jail and someone else is holding the key. So Pintel Yid is a real Jewish potency. Pintel Yid is a serious part of who a Yid is. But it's not an energy that you can harness, you see. It's not a power that you can use in a controlled way. It's an infinite power that emerges under unique conditions when a person is facing a circumstance where he or she has to say to him or herself, if I walk across this threshold, I'm not a Jew anymore. Whatever that threshold is, and each person meets something else, and then this is aroused, then this is awakened. But this Pintel Yid's power, which is an infinite power, is not something we walk around with every day. You know, when you study the Maimorim, and they speak about Mashiach, and they connect Mashiach to Yechida, this is what it sounds like. After Mashiach comes, every Yid's Yechida is going to be, in other words, the Pintel Yid is not going to be a Pintel, it's going to be an expansion. The idea that being a Jew is my true identity to the point that there's no way I can divorce myself from that identity is not going to be sleeping, it's not going to be exiled, it's going to be manifest. Mashiach is called Yechida. But as the world stands at this moment, I have a Pintel Yid, it's a real force, but I can't harness it. I cannot take this energy and use it in a constructive way, in a day-to-day way, in a managed way. I have no control over it. It's an infinite force. It comes out when it's triggered, and I don't even know what's going to trigger it. In one Yid, it's going to be Rahman Litzlan the Tzelem, and another Yid, it's not going to be the Tzelem. It's going to be the condition where he's forced to hurt a fellow Jew, or whatever the case is. Everybody has a different trigger, but it's not a manageable power. And the whole point of all of these prakim is to make this exact point. You want to take the power of the Pintel Yid and manage it, control it. Control it to keep you erlich, keep you in the right path in a day-to-day way. That's an interesting concept. The Pintel Yid is an infinite force that exists in the subconscious of the neshama, that by itself it emerges when it wishes to in a way that we have no control over. The Alter Rebbe endeavors to make that into a manageable force. Manageable doesn't mean limited, chas v'shalom. Manage means to focus it, to use it in my day-to-day life. That's why this takes 8 chapters. Because the Alter Rebbe has to teach us quite a bit before he gets to chapter 25, where he finally makes his pitch of how the Pintel Yid's energy can be used to be a bane in your day-to-day life. I told this to you last week, that when the Rebbe got married, his father Rabbi Levi, who was living in Russia, wrote him a letter giving him all kinds of instructions about how to get ready for the wedding, what to do on the way of the wedding, the day of the wedding, and so on and so forth. And one of the things he writes to him famously, I told this to you very recently, is B'yei ma'chupa tilmeid Tanya Perek of Hey v'kavona dafke v'loi be'iyun. On the day of your wedding, I want you to study Tanya chapter 25, but study it with kavona, not with iyun, which means with your heart, not with your brain. The Rebbe's father writes to the Rebbe, don't study it as a scholar, study it as a hearts. The Rebbe's father was a great scholar, a big gon. He says, the day of your wedding, study this chapter, but study it like it's a piece of siddur. Let it talk to your heart and not to your mind, because it's in this Perek that the Rebbe presents us with the idea that the power of Mesiras Nefesh can be used to be a Jew in your day-to-day living. And this is what's going to happen now. We understand what the Pintel Yid is. It's a very powerful force. But what we don't know is how can I use the power of this Pintel Yid in a way that can help me be Jewish b'chayei hayem yem, in my day-to-day living. And this is what's going to take the Alter Rebbe 6 prak. Okay, so this is where we're holding. This is the Shalom Aleichem. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
Who said to who? The Alter Rebbe said to his son? Learned in his
The Rebbe, Reb Leivik, told our Rebbe. Reb Levi Yitzchak told our Rebbe, B'yei machasenet til me Tanya pedikov hey, b'kavona dafka avaloi be'iyun. It's printed in the letters. It's such an interesting Reb Leivik. Very fast. The letters from the Rebbe's father to the Rebbe are just so interesting. It's a piece of Chabad history, a very important piece of Chabad history, a very personal piece of Chabad history. It's incredibly warm. I guess when you have a son like the Rebbe, it's not so hard to love him. Huh? But if every son was as loved by his father like the Rebbe was by his father, well, the Welt Oigeven Shenet, I guarantee you, he loved him so much, and it comes across in the letters. It comes across that love. Incredible. Anyway, questions or comments? So we're going to start to learn. But appreciate what our trajectory is, what our direction is. Our direction is, we just spent a bunch of time discussing Pintel Yid. We're now going to spend a bunch more time discussing the harnessing of the Pintel Yid, making it a manageable power that I could use in my day-to-day life. This is the direction. But the Alter Rebbe goes off on a huge tangent. And we're going to forget about Pintel Yid for a long time. You understand? By the time we get back to chapter 25, it'll be Mistama after Sukkot. I'm not sure what year, but it'll be after Sukkot, yeah? So here we go. Perek Chof, V'hine. Mudaz Eis Lakil. Now that I told you what the Pintel Yid is, chapter 20, Perek Chof. And what's remaining for us to do is to use the power of the Pintel, to harness the power of the Pintel Yid, to be frum, to be ehrlich, in sur meran, asay teva, not doing what's wrong and doing what's right in my daily life. Says the Rebbe, in order for me to explain how this incredibly powerful force, which is in the subconscious of the Neshama, can be so managed that I can use it as my motivation for being a Beinani, B'chaya Yem Yem, I need to digress. And the beginning of that digression is the following statement. Everybody knows, Ki mitzvahs v'azhoras aveidah zara, the positive mitzvah, that's what the word mitzvah means. Masora means, and the negative mitzvah, which is associated with aveidah zara, sheheim, which are shnei dibris harishein, in the first 2 of the 10 commandments, anoichi, which is the positive commandment, v'layir which is the negative commandment, heim klolos kol ha'teira kula, they embrace, they encompass, they include the entirety of the Torah. You know, I'm sure, that the Bahag writes, and that Tzemach Tzedek says that the Rambam agrees with this Bahag, that believing in God is not a mitzvah. Believing in God is not a commandment. It doesn't mean you don't need to believe in God. It just means that it's not a commandment. Why? So the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, brings the words of the Abarbanel. If you already believe in God, you don't need to be told to believe in Him. And if you don't believe in God, it's not going to be helped to be told to believe in Him, because you don't believe in Him, that you should listen to Him and believe in Him. So Emunah is not a mitzvah. Faith is not a mitzvah. It's before mitzvahs. I like to call it a super mitzvah, or a mitzvah close. We've had many, many discussions on this subject in a variety of different contexts, because the Rebbe is very into this in the Siches, the Rambam's idea of a mitzvah close, a general mitzvah. So faith is considered a super mitzvah. So if faith is not a specific commandment, it's not one of the Ramach mitzvahs to say, it's not one of the 240 positive commandments. So what is the first mitzvah? The answer is that the first mitzvah is to know God intellectually. That the God that I already believe in, I have to know. I'm commanded by the Eibishter to be mekayim the mitzvah of das alakei avicha of avdei b'lev shalom, to know God intellectually. And there are 2 mitzvahs in this category. There are 2 mitzvahs in this category. The first is Yedias Hashem, the knowledge of Hashem. And the second is called Yedias HaAchdus, understanding the unity of Hashem. The difference between the first mitzvah and the second mitzvah. So first of all, the mitzvah of Yedias Hashem, we learn from the pasuk, Oneich Hashem Elokecha asher etzicha me'eretz Mitzrayim bebeis avodah. And the second mitzvah, which is understand the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we learn from the pasuk, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, one God. So there's two mitzvahs I say. One is to understand Hashem intellectually, which is the same for a Jew and a non-Jew. It's the same for a Jew and a non-Jew. And the second mitzvah to understand the unity of God, and here there's differences, or there could be differences between a Jew and a non-Jew, but it's not relevant to us right now. But the first two commandments speak about the yes of God and the no of God. The yes of God means I have to believe in and I have to worship and I have to understand the truth of Hashem. And no is not to be involved in understanding and worshiping chas v'sholem idols, idol worship, other gods with a small g. In other words, the phenomena that there could be a consideration, that we could think about the possibility of there being what's called in Torah shnius, duality, division, split in the Eibishter's word. That's Avodah Zarah doesn't mean there's no God. Avodah Zarah means there's more than one. There's not in charge of everything. And religion, Yiddishkeit is echad, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad. There's only one. So the Alter Rebbe says the first two commandments that speak to the positive and negative of this idea. The positive, that there's one God who we not just believe, we try to understand the best of our ability to serve Him. And the negative, we stay away from, we don't allow ourselves to be entangled and confused and distracted by the notion of chas v'sholem, more than one. This is the whole of Yiddishkeit. The whole of Yiddishkeit is included in these two commandments. And I'm reading on. Kidi boranaychi, the first commandment, which is to understand intellectually the notion that there is a God who took us out of Egypt. Kailul kol ramach mitzvahs aseh, it includes all the 248 positive commandments. V'lei yelachon, the negative commandment, do not worship idols, do not own idols and worship idols, is kailul kol shasam mitzvahs leis, that includes the 365 negative commandments. And accordingly, in the first two commandments, you have the gist of the whole Torah. What's the gist of the whole Torah? Ein eid milvado, that there's only one God and He's fully in charge and He has no real helpers or assistants, because His truth is that ein eid milvado. Those are the first two mitzvahs in the Torah. Okay? V'lachein, Saltem says therefore, shamaynu anoiche v'layeh lecha levad mepi advora. These two mitzvahs we have to hear from Hashem directly. K'mayim azal, as the Gemara says, mipnei shehem, because these two mitzvahs are close to Torah kula, the entirety of the Torah. So although there were 10 commandments, aseres adibris, and we make the case, we argue that the Yidden heard from Hashem all 10 dibris, according to the Gemara in Makkah, it's not so simple. The first two we heard from him, the other 8 we also heard, but we didn't understand what we were hearing because they were all spoken at the same time, and we heard them again from Moshe Rabbeinu. So although on the one hand all 10 commandments were given to us by the Eibishter Har Sinai, however that's explained, on the other hand, this connection with these two mitzvahs, the understanding that there's only one God, and the denial of the possibility for there being anything other than that one God, we had to hear from the Eibishter directly in an explicit way, in a clear way, in a way that we understood it, because it is said b'sheidish kol ha'teira kul. Okay, now, fair enough, we got it, right? Judaism has a lot of rules, but the base of Judaism is belief in God, and belief in God means that there's only one. Monotheism, there's only one God, and He's the master of heaven and earth, not just of heaven, but also of earth. Ba'achas Hashem. The basis for the whole of Judaism is that there is an Eibishter, and He's not off on vacation or resting under a tree. He's the Balabayas of the world at this moment, because there's nothing outside of Him. This is the foundation of the whole of Torah. Okay? And the Alter Rebbe wants to explore this. He wants to explain to us both, number one, what it means that the first mitzvah is Anochi, that there's to understand Hashem and really to understand that there's nothing besides Hashem. And number two, lo yilacha, the prohibition against worshipping idols. So he continues. I wish to explain well this notion that Anochi is the foundation of the whole idea of there being a God, and lo yilacha, the foundation of the idea that it shouldn't chas v'shalom have any considerations for anything other than one. It becomes necessary for the Alter Rebbe to mention, at least in brief, inyan umuhus achdus shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the idea and the substance of the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sheniki yachad v'yuchad, because He is the one and only one, and we have to understand the achdus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'chol ma'aminim, all of us believe Shu levadahu, that the only thing that exists is Him. That just like just like Hashem made the world, there was nothing besides for Him. Shahayahu levadahu was the only thing that existed. Like it says in the Siddur, you are the only thing that was before the creation. But then it says, even though you made the world, there's still one. As Pirish, this means Who mamish? Hashem himself mamish. Was the only thing that existed before the creation, and he, Hashem himself mamish, is the only thing that exists after the creation. Beli shum shinu, without any change whatsoever. Could accept what the pasuk says, and the Hashem Eibishter hasn't changed. In other words, the idea of Achdus, the idea of one God. Now, how this is going to get us back to the question of using the power of Mesiras Nefesh, using the power of Av Mesiras in my day-to-day life, is going to be a while. So put it on a shelf. You can actually put it on a high shelf. I'll tell you when to take it down. In other words, we're not going to be going back every week to Av Mesiras. I spent a lot of time today creating the segue, the bond, the link between the last two Perakim and the Perek which follows. But the new subject, which is going to dominate our discussion over the next foreseeable group of weeks, is the idea of Achdus Hashem, the idea of there being one God. And how is this going to help us understand Mesiras Nefesh and day-to-day? Where you're going to have to come back for many weeks until we get back to Perek Chav Hei. So what does Achdus Hashem mean? And I'm going to stop the class now. I'm just going to give you a little thought. What does Achdus Hashem mean? Achdus Hashem does not mean that there's only one God and not two. That's Yedias Hashem. It's common sense. It's common sense there can only be one God. Achdus Hashem means there's only one guy in charge. Right? You know the Lashon Harav. I mean, I remember teaching this to you a bunch of years ago when we did this last time. Right? We're all Lubavitcher Chassidim, and many of us are old enough to remember standing by the Rebbe. And the Rebbe taught Torah. But the Rebbe was not a teacher of Torah. The Rebbe was a giver of faith, right? He was a Re'ei Yamun, he was a Rebbe, Nasi B'Yisrael. He handed out faith in cookies, in parcels, in dollar bills. He handed out God. He gave us the Eibishter Mamish. And to this end, first of all, the Rebbe didn't talk. The Rebbe roared. The Rebbe roared. The Rebbe's voice is an unusual kind of a voice. But the Rebbe talked in very precise ways. And he said things in a very deliberate and emphatic way. It went into your soul. When the Rebbe spoke, you heard, you listened. I tell people, my Mother Chazal that I know by heart, quotes from Gemara that I know by heart, I didn't learn, I heard them from the Rebbe. Because when you hear the Rebbe say something, it's his intonation, his passion is so strong, it brands into your heart. I know many Gemaras that I know them verbatim by heart because I Pasha heard the Rebbe recite them. Not because I learned the Gemaras, and I learned the Gemaras also, but I've forgotten them long ago. Because the Rebbe used to roar, Brum and Re'aleib. You can't translate that in English, but it means roar like a lion. There was a certain intensity. Mitzadecha, the Rebbe was so calm and so normal, so collected. But when you got close, you felt a power that was overwhelming. The force of this person. And he was burning Eibishter into the hearts of everybody around him. He gave out the Eibishter to every Jew. And Lahagel to non-Jews as well. This is what a Rebbe is. He gives out the Eibishter. And as a result of this, the Rebbe very often repeated himself. I'll say names. I don't know if I'm allowed to. When Mrs. Blooming passed away, Rabbi Blooming, who teaches his mother, passed away. I went to Menachem Avodim in Borapar, and he was sitting with his father, Rabbi Blooming Senior. Rabbi Blooming Senior is an Eidim of Rabbi Gedalia Shor. Rabbi Gedalia Shor was one of the most famous American Rosh Yeshivas. He was an American-born Rosh Yeshiva from the first. He was a very big Gaon, and he was a Chassidish Yid. He was a Bayana Chassid. And there was a Bayana Rebbe in New York who he would frequent, Rabbi Gedalia Shor. And his son-in-law told us that Rabbi Gedalia Shor, he had a Yechidus with the Rebbe in the 70s, which is a whole story unto itself. But he came to Fabrengen. And when he came back from the Fabrengen, he took his son-in-law Lubavitcher. And he knew he was a Lubavitcher. He took him, he can't learn it. He took him because he wanted a son of Ben Teira. But his son-in-law was a Lubavitcher. Rabbi Blooming's father was a Lubavitcher when he got married. And he came back from the Fabrengen and he said to his son-in-law, why does he keep repeating himself? Why does he keep repeating himself? And he told me, Rabbi Blooming Senior said to me, my Shver was very quick. He was mechuded. He was very, very sharp. He was very quick. And the Rebbe speaks so slowly, and he makes the same point over and fakir. The more scholarly sichas, the Rebbe spoke very quickly because it was spoken to a smaller group of people. Why does he keep repeating? This was his quote. This was the word that he heard. So, okay, that's the Ad Kan. This is what I heard from him. Chai Baruch Halberstam told me, I don't know how he knows this, but Somebody once asked the Rebbe why he repeated himself in the middle of a sikha, and the Rebbe said, "You didn't see who just walked in." the Rebbe didn't just say sikhas to share ideas, which put them in books and say, "Wow, what a great scholar." The Rebbe was creating Jews with every breath, with every word, with every syllable. And he was burning Hashem into our hearts. He was branding the Eibush into our hearts. That the intonation, the way that Rebbe said things, is a rein in the kishkis. You never forgot it, you know. And one of the frequently repeated quotes of the Lubavitcher Rebbe is "Boirei Olam Umanhige." How many times did you hear it? "Boirei Olam Umanhiga." He would say it to the children, he would say it to the men, he would say it to the women. But when the Rebbe said "Boirei Olam Umanhiga," you believed. You know, they say most Americans believe in God, but that's where it ends. Hashem is not the creator of the world, He's the master of the world. And there's a very big difference between Boirei Olam and Manig Olam. Believing that the Eibush, the creator of the world, means that the world didn't come from nothing. It means that the world has a purpose and a direction. But Manig Olam means that He's in charge, He's my boss, I work for Him direct. And He oversees me. Hine Hashem nitzav alav. Every individual person, the Eibush stands over each one, like this story the Alter Rebbe. The Eibush stands over each Jew every minute. Where are you holding? It's a whole different God. And the Rebbe said this again and again and again. He's the creator of the world and He's the master of the world. He's not off in a different universe. He's not off on vacation. He's not retired. Chas v'shalom, ozav Hashem esatz. It's certainly not like many philosophers argue that God is so great that He doesn't care about us. Or what's worse, God is so great He can't be involved in the trivialities of our worlds, which is antithetical to the belief in the oneness of God. The oneness of God doesn't mean that there's only one. The oneness of God means there's nothing outside of Him, including me and you. And that's the Taich, Manig HaOlam, the governor of the world. So the Alter Rebbe says, for me to get you back to a place where you can understand how the power of the Pintel Yid can be managed and focused to be used as a means, a tool of Avodas Hashem in the daily life, we have to visit Achdas Hashem. We have to visit upon the first two commandments, which are not just the belief, but the understanding that there is a creator of this world who also runs the world, and that there's nothing outside of that mastery, over that balabatashkeit, over that ownership, over that mastery. And this is what we're going to be doing in the foreseeable future. We're going to have a discussion about both sides of this coin, Achdas Hashem, what it means that God is not just the creator of the world, but the master of the world. And Lahavdil Elef Alfi Avdalah, the alternative, which is Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah doesn't mean you worship stone and wood. Avodah Zarah simply means that you don't believe that He's personally involved in everything. And some things He doesn't care about, some things are out of His control, some things are governed by other people or other creations, whatever the case may be. This is what Avodah Zarah is. And the Lashon Hara, Ukafi is Ba'al Lakaman. We'll get back to it. But this is what we learned today. We opened up chapter 20, Perek Chof, which is transitioning from the discussion on Ava Musuteres to the discussion on Achdas Hashem, because Alter Rebbe is going to use these two ideas, Achdas Hashem, and the opposite of Achdas Hashem. The idea of Ozav, Hashem being out of control, the world not being His, as a means to present us with the tools, with the technique, that will allow us to use the power of the Pintel Yid to be a Benyan in our daily lives. Questions or comments? No questions, no comments, so we're going to break. And in a few minutes, mamash a few, we'll learn Hayem Yem. Thank you all for coming.